Hey you 12 people watching this, my name is Just Dave, and this is another video on DMing tips. Today we're going to be going over 5 things that you should avoid doing while running a game. Like before, I'll be giving some examples as we go along, and I'll try to keep them succinct. But let's get right into it. Number 1, invisible walls. Few things are more annoying in a video game than running into an invisible wall, whether it's a linear on-rail shooter or an open-world adventure game. Running into an invisible wall or barrier can really break the flow and sort of ruin the immersion. Now apply that to what is probably the most expansive and customizable and free-form adventure game ever made, and you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Invisible walls come in a few different shapes and sizes in D&D, not always just the invisible, impassable barrier. Although, considering the game, that might actually make a bit more sense. Magic and all, and appropriate to setting, I suppose. No, the invisible walls I'm talking about are when you actively deny a player options in a way that's not organic or setting appropriate. When trying to guide your players down a certain path or get them to go a specific way without directly putting them there, you need to be a bit more cunning in D&D. You need to be a bit smarter about how you do it. Because the more blatant the wall, invisible or not, the more the players are going to fight back and attempt to scale or break through the wall. If the players are in an open street and there's a fight going on and someone tries to escape into a building through a door, saying something as simple as the door is locked might work for some parties, but if that party has a rogue or a spellcaster that can open these, you might find yourself in a bit of trouble. You'll be forced to say something along the lines of, "It doesn't work," or "You can't pick this lock," which is a direct challenge to the player's capabilities and will annoy them when something they should be able to do, they can't. What you've done there is you've taken options away from the player. You've walled it off. And this is going to cause some resentment from your players. Invisible walls can be more than just preventing your players from accessing certain areas. It can also be accessing certain items or skills or abilities. Throwing up walls that just don't make sense. I can think of a game that I played a long time ago where my character just wanted to buy a crossbow, and for some reason the DM really didn't want me to have one. I think he was afraid I was going to try some min-maxing stuff with it. Who knows how. But he decided he didn't want me to have one. So in a town with a population of roughly 2,000, I wasn't able to find one. Nobody would sell me one. They didn't exist. It was the most bizarre thing ever. This common item just wasn't around. The real problem wasn't really that there were no crossbows. It's that suddenly there weren't any crossbows. Arbitrarily. An item that by rights should have been readily available to us just wasn't there, and he had no good reasons for it, beyond that he didn't want me to have one. And that really sort of took me out of the game in that moment, because I became more concerned with why this town didn't have crossbows than playing my character or moving the story along. And that's how invisible walls can really sort of bring your game to a halt. You bring up these walls that by rights shouldn't be there, and players will attempt to investigate. After all, it's in the adventuring spirit to try to break through walls and climb them, especially ones that really shouldn't be there. Number 2 is railroading. This is a similar topic to invisible walls, except that, as my roommate put it, this is the positive mirror to the negative of invisible walls. Where invisible walls deny players access, railroading instead allows only your predetermined path. Railroading is when you force your players into predetermined scenarios regardless of their choices or actions. Now, Dave, I hear you ask, isn't that part of DMing? And, well, yes, but it's more about how it's applied. It doesn't really become railroading until you have given players the illusion of options or alternative paths, only to force your own way through, denying them any attempts that they've made. Essentially, a predetermined outcome. An example that comes to mind is a session that I played a while back. It's a one-off. We were high-leveled heroes who were put on a quest to stop a big bad evil demon from being freed by this ritual that would end the world. It's a classic setup and one that I particularly like for one-offs. It's great. A lot of action, a lot of stakes. That being said, things went pretty well until about the end. Things went south, starting when we ran into the mini-boss. This sort of pre-boss was presented as persuadable able to be converted to our side. But he actually wasn't. And then after him, we got to the ritual site, and the ritual was presented as something that could be stopped. But it actually couldn't be. So what happened is the mini-boss stayed unpersuaded, and the ritual was completed, releasing the big bad evil demon and dropping us into a completely impossible to win boss fight. After struggling for a few rounds, the DM allowed the boss to be one-shot when the wizard decided to crack a Staff of the Magi over his head, giving us an unsatisfying conclusion to the end of this already troubled session. There are a few issues I had with this game, but the main point came in that we were presented with options and alternative paths, only to have the DM's decisions override them completely. The DM even confessed at the end that we were on his train and there was no getting off. This really took the wind out of us as players, and we started to wonder why should we even bother trying to play our characters if nothing we did mattered beyond rolling attack rolls and damage. The simple solution would have been presented as a combat-only scenario. Present the enemies as unpersuadable, or us arriving at the ritual too late. There are ways to make a predetermined outcome make sense. To set it up as if there was only ever really one path. Instead, we were shown a vast menu of tasty-looking treats, but no matter what we ordered, we were getting hot dogs. 3. Playing a character in your party. Don't do it. Don't. I'm not talking about playing an NPC or playing a temporary character in the party to help guide them through or something like that. What I'm talking about is playing a permanent member of the party, someone who's going to be with them for the long haul. Just don't do it. Your players will always resent you for it. Every time something goes well for your character, they'll think it's favoritism. When things go poorly, they'll think it's contrived. When your player knows something, they'll think that it's some kind of meta-knowledge. And they'll just automatically assume, no matter how generous they are, that you are somehow implementing special knowledge for your character's success. On the other side of that, you're really just spending too much time, too much effort splitting your focus between running a session and trying to play a character in a fair way. It takes away from the experience. So, if I can hammer only one of these into your head by the end of this, it's don't play a character in your party. 4 is flip-flopping or waffling on your decisions, changing your mind on things that you've decided midway through a game. Consistency is key if you want to keep your players engaged or immersed in the world that you have, to keep them involved in your adventure. While you're playing, invariably you'll come across some situations that the rules don't readily cover, whether it's creative use of a spell or an ability. There's going to be something that comes up that has escaped the meticulous rule writing of the publishers. Hey Dave, I was wondering, can I take some copper wire and wrap it around my staff and then I could deliver my shocking grasp from like 10 feet away, right? Hey Dave, can I use my deflect arrows to deflect my allies' arrows around corners at enemies they can't see? When these kinds of situations come up, you're going to have to make a decision, whether that's a unilateral ruling or a vote between the players. And whatever decision you come to, I highly recommend that you stick to it, at least until the end of the session. Few things can break the fun or flow of a game than a DM who's constantly changing his mind about how the rules work. Players have trouble making decisions when they don't know if what happened last round is going to happen this round, or if what worked in the last fight is still going to work in this one. This can create obvious holes in your story, and it's really difficult to make decisions in a world where the rules are constantly changing. I talked earlier about a town with no crossbows. Well, that one got a little bit worse. To continue that story, the same DM, after realizing how big of a goof he had made by having a town with no crossbows and being unable to come up with a good reason that they didn't have any, decided to invent an entire underground back alley crossbow sales ring where people in shady suits with briefcases tried to sell me crossbows at exorbitant prices. While an underground crossbow sales ring is not the strangest thing to happen in a fantasy setting like D&D, what this did is it created a precedent. We all knew now that this DM would make decisions just on the fly, and then he would change his mind within 10 minutes, which makes it a little bit hard for us to take things he says seriously, as well as makes it hard for us to make decisions. Another thing he did, a little bit more blatant later on, is that he decided he didn't want us to have magic items that he had given us. Instead of discussing it with us and coming up with some way that we would lose them, he decided to, at the beginning of a next session, to slap down a 50-mile high, 100-mile long, and 1-mile deep anti-magic barrier that would destroy all of our magic items we passed through it. Ignoring the logistics of making such a thing, or the fact that we were supposed to be killing the guy who made it, this was a bit ridiculous. None of us wanted to lose all of our magic items. What player would? So of course we set about trying to find ways around it. We tried digging. He told us it goes into the ground. We thought, we'll go around it. He announced to us that it goes hundreds of miles in either direction, following an entire mountain range. So there was no way around it that we could reasonably go. And then, even though flight wasn't really an option, he told us that it went a mile into the air and was a mile thick, so we weren't teleporting past it. We weren't going to fly over it. And being really only level 4 characters, we weren't in any condition to do many of the more extreme ways of getting past it. Realizing that he had goofed and that there was no way he was getting us past that thing, he suddenly changed his mind, deciding and declaring that if we put all of our stuff in a bag of holding, we could carry it through safely. Again, ignoring rules and all of that stuff and how that wouldn't work, this was a mistake on his part. He had created a fixture, a massive feature, and a barrier, an obstacle, something that we were supposed to get past in a way that he wanted us to, but ultimately was unwilling to let us do. So he had to change it to let us through. This once again told us that the world's rules were subject to change, and that he could be pushed over if we protested enough. That campaign was a long string of bad things, and I will one day share the entire story, hopefully with a couple of friends who have also played in it, so you can get their perspectives. But what it did, ultimately, is the frequency with which he changed his mind made a world that was unstable, and made us take it less seriously. So, when you make decisions, stick to those decisions through the game, and then maybe after the session discuss it. So that way, at least in session, things are consistent, and the players can make informed decisions without worrying, does that even work anymore? 5 is changing a player's character. I cannot stress this enough. Do not change a player's character's backstory or personality without discussing it first. When you do this, this is essentially a mortal wound to the immersion of the player. You've taken what is the most customizable part of their character, the part of the character they had the most control over, and changed it without them. They've essentially lost their character. Hashtag not my character. How can you know how to play a character that you didn't make? You don't know this person anymore. Story time. This will be the last one, but it still takes place in the same campaign that I talked about before. This DM is sort of the gold standard for bad DMs. We were sitting at the bar of an inn in the same town as the No Crossbows, followed by underground crossbow dealers. Just sort of chilling, having some character dialogue. One of the better parts of this campaign, honestly. When suddenly a man burst in through the inn's doors, pointed a finger at my friend, and said, "You killed my wife." Now, my friend was very confused, because we had done a session very early on where we had done a few unsavory things. He was an evil paladin, I was a neutral ranger. As a bounty hunter, we're not the greatest people, but we were absolutely positive that we had never killed anybody's wife. In fact, we had never killed any commoners as far as we knew. We were really only there to kill the people we were after. So he tried to justify this, saying, whoa, hold on a second, I didn't kill this guy's wife, or I don't remember killing anybody like that. What's going on? Talking to the DM. When the DM just straight up announced, oh no, this is in the past, like way in the past. You killed his wife. And we were all kind of silent for a minute there. The DM had just written a piece into his backstory without consulting him, rewriting a part of his character, because part of his character is that he was evil but honorable, and he never killed innocent civilians, only people who were in his way, basically. By doing this, he changed my friend's character. And my friend just gave up at that point, said, sure, fine, I guess I did. And it was the death blow for him. It was the sort of the tipping point. Because from that point on, we knew that this campaign was screwed. Our backstories could change on a whim. The rules of the world could change on a whim. And so there was no reason to get invested in our characters, because they weren't really our characters. We were apparently just borrowing them from the DM. So if you have to change a character's backstory, or want to, discuss it with them first. Find a way to work it in. And there's nothing wrong with changing these things as long as you've discussed it with the player. Because ultimately, while it is your world, it is their character. And if you're going to change those kinds of things, then why do you even have players? So there you have it. Those are your 5 things to not do as a DM. This list will, of course, grow in the future with future videos, as well as the list of things to do as a DM, and a few other interesting pieces of information. I plan on putting up some videos of me sharing some of my stories, and in the next coming months, I'm going to be recording some interviews with my previous players so that you can hear some of their stories, hear about some of their favorite characters, their favorite settings, things that they like and don't like from DMs, and who knows what else. So stay tuned for those. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, all that stuff the normal YouTubers tell you. And thanks for watching. I'm just Dave, and take care. Hey Dave, if I jump on the centaur's back, can I use all my mounted feats for him and me?